Hey everybody, this is Marty, and I'm going to give my case conceptualization for the week. First, let me tell you a little bit about my placement. I am at Prairie St. John Psychiatric Hospital here in Fargo, North Dakota, and I work specifically on the inpatient unit, which is for people who are either suicidal or are homicidal or are in psychosis or just really in a severe state of mental illness. People don't stay here very long typically. The average patient stay is 5 to 7 days. I think I've seen some people be released much shorter than that. And then there's been some patients who've been here for many weeks, if not longer than many weeks. So it can really vary. But when they're there, typically they're there because either they are bipolar and really manic, I've seen that a lot, or they are suicidal. I feel like primarily those are the two things that I see most of the time with the patients that I'm with. So my job as an intern, they really have me doing two different things. I give psychosocial assessments, which is a structured interview. And then I also lead the group therapy, of which there is a skills group and a process group that I lead. And that's what I do. So I really don't have much opportunity to work with patients for very long. I'll do their psychosocial assessment, and then I may never work with them again. Or I may be with a patient in group therapy who I've never met before the moment that I see them in group. So meeting somebody, coming up with a diagnosis and a treatment plan and all those things, unfortunately, I'm not really getting experience in, which has been a point of frustration for me. But, can't do anything about that right now. So let's look at some of these questions. The person that I am going to be talking about, we'll call him Bob. I'm choosing Bob just because he was the person that I did my intake with just this morning. And his reason for referral, he is a voluntary patient. Many of the patients are referred by a emergency room or a hospital somewhere else, whereas other people just check themselves in because they know they need help. And that was the case with Bob. He has suicidal ideation of wanting to or thinking about jumping off of a third-story building and stabbing himself with a knife while at work. He was really wrestling with those thoughts. He knew they weren't thoughts that he wanted, so he came in. He did tell me in the assessment that earlier this year he did separate from his wife. I believe he said back in February, and now lives with his daughter, his stepdaughter, and we'll be talking more about her in a little bit. So he is, I believe, a 47-year-old Caucasian male, and some background is that he says he has had depression and anxiety since he was school age, and he doesn't have any reported history of abuse or trauma, except that he said he was bullied in school throughout all of his time in school. He was raised by his father and his stepmother, and he seems to have a really good relationship with his dad. In fact, after the assessments, I have to call a family member. Called up his dad. His dad was super supportive, so that was really good. He does have many siblings. I believe he had 9, 7 brothers and 2 sisters, and but he said that they don't speak very much. And he's got a twin who he doesn't even speak very much with at all. so not super close with the other parts of his family. So I mentioned that he separated from his wife and is now living with his stepdaughter. And it sounds like what led up to him coming in his words, is that he was really concerned over his stepdaughter's mental illness, herself having been hospitalized in the past, herself dealing with bipolar disorder, and he was trying to help her, and in which case he went downhill, and that's what brought this on. But then he also said that as he started living with his stepdaughter, he started to have feelings for her, romantic feelings. And then I believe it was last week, his uncle passed away, and he said he was pretty close with his uncle. And even though he's not much of a drinker, he decided his way of coping with that is he was just going to go and get really drunk. And he did that, and that night he said he exposed himself to his stepdaughter. And I think that made it a little weird between the two of them for a little while. He didn't talk too much about how his feelings for her are reciprocated, but they are still living together. As far as testing information, we really don't do too much testing, at least not on my end that I see. The only thing would be our alcohol screening, of which he did score slightly high, but that was because of his drinking last week after his uncle's death. But otherwise, he said he's only drank like 3 or 4 times in the past year. The client's strengths and deficits is that he was actually really friendly and easy to speak with. Sometimes for these assessments, I have to go and wake up patients, which doesn't always go over super well. But this guy immediately popped up. He was ready to talk, and he was ready to share. And talking to him was just like talking to anybody else. I shouldn't say anybody else, but he seemed very friendly, respectful, easy to talk to. So I think that is a strength of his. He also has a job. He has a supportive father. He went to college for a little while, but he did not finish. So diagnostic impression is depression and anxiety with suicidal ideation. Theoretical framework for Bob. The theoretical framework I'm going to use is the one that I'm afraid we have to use at the hospital, which is ACT therapy, which I'm still not a huge fan of. I think there's some parts that are good, but some parts I have not completely bought into myself yet. But ACT stands for Acceptance Commitment Therapy, and the A stands for acceptance. Sorry, I'm in my classroom at school. The janitor just walked in. He's going to go somewhere else, though. So acceptance is basically accepting the feelings and urges that you're having and making room for them, such as if you're feeling anxious, instead of cognitive therapy where you would fight against that and try to convince yourself that you don't need to be anxious anymore, and you weigh the evidence. Acceptance. Well, I guess I have a time limit here. Well, that's too bad.